Edward Alexander Crowley, October 12, 1875 to December 1, 1947, was an English occultist, philosopher, ceremonial magician, poet, painter, novelist and mountaineer. He founded the religion of Thelema, identifying himself as the prophet entrusted with guiding humanity into the Aeon of Horus in the early 20th century. A prolific writer, he published widely over the course of his life. Born to a wealthy family in Royal Leamington Spa, Warwickshire, Crowley rejected his parents' fundamentalist Christian Plymouth Brethren faith to pursue an interest in Western esotericism. He was educated at Trinity College at the University of Cambridge, where he focused his attentions on mountaineering and poetry, resulting in several publications. Some biographers allege that here he was recruited into a British intelligence agency, further suggesting that he remained a spy throughout his life. In 1898, he joined the esoteric Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, where he was trained in ceremonial magic by Samuel Liddell MacGregor Mathers and Alan Bennett. He went mountaineering in Mexico with Oscar Eckenstein, before studying Hindu and Buddhist practices in India. In 1904, he married Rose Edith Kelly and they honeymooned in Cairo, Egypt, where Crowley claimed to have been contacted by a supernatural entity named Aiwass, who provided him with the Book of the Law, a sacred text that served as the basis for Thelema. Announcing the start of the Aeon of Horus, the book declared that its followers should do what thou wilt and seek to align themselves with their true will through the practice of ceremonial magic. After the unsuccessful 1905 Kanchenjunga expedition and a visit to India and China, Crowley returned to Britain, where he attracted attention as a prolific author of poetry, novels and occult literature. In 1907, he and George Cecil Jones co-founded an esoteric order, the A Therefore, through which they propagated Thelema. After spending time in Algeria, in 1912 he was initiated into another esoteric order, the German-based Ordo Templi Orientis, OTO, rising to become the leader of its British branch, which he reformulated in accordance with his Thelemite beliefs. Through the OTO, Thelemite groups were established in Britain, Australia and North America. Crowley spent the First World War in the United States, where he took up painting and campaigned for the German war effort against Britain, later revealing that he had infiltrated the pro-German movement to assist the British intelligence services. In 1920, he established the Abbey of Thelema, a religious commune in Cefalu, Sicily, where he lived with various followers. His libertine lifestyle led to denunciations in the British press, and the Italian government evicted him in 1923. He divided the following 2 decades between France, Germany, and England, and continued to promote Thelema until his death. Crowley gained widespread notoriety during his lifetime, being a drug user, bisexual and an individualist social critic. Crowley has remained a highly influential figure over Western esotericism and the counterculture of the 1960s and continues to be considered a prophet in Thelema. He is the subject of various biographies and academic studies. 1. Aleister Crowley formed his own religion. Crowley was born into a wealthy family in Royal Leamington Spa in Warwickshire. His parents were quite religious as they were members of fundamentalist Christianity. This is a movement that emphasized biblical literalism in the late 19th and 20th centuries among the British and Americans. At an early age, Crowley rejected his parents' faith and pursued an interest in Western esotericism, sometimes referred to as the Western mystery tradition. In the 1900s, he formed his own religious movement known as Thelema. It is a religion that is into occultism, Western esotericism and spiritual philosophy. Crowley even came up with writings that he collectively named the Holy Books of Thelema, pertaining to the teachings and beliefs of the religion of Thelema. 2. He was addicted to cocaine and heroin. Earlier in his life, Crowley was diagnosed with asthma, and heroin was one of the drugs prescribed to help with it. He quickly became interested in other drugs thereafter and how they may support his religious beliefs. Unfortunately, he developed an addiction to heroin and cocaine. Cocaine ended up eroding his nasal passages. He was a frequent drug user and even incorporated psychoactive substances, a substance or drug that affects how the brain works, causes changes in moods, behavior, thought etc., into his occult work. In his novel, Diary of a Drug Fiend, he discusses drug-related issues and critiques contemporary drug legislation. He discusses his thoughts on drugs and religious experience and suggests his addiction was a more important force in his life. 3. Aleister Crowley once faked his own death. Crowley once faked his death for a month in 1930 while in Portugal, just to see what would happen. He worked with his friend Fernando Pessoa. To achieve this, he left a sad note about heartbreak and left it at the top of a dangerous rock formation. This was so that it would make the implication that he had committed suicide by jumping to his death. His friend then followed it up by feeding stories and ideas to the local papers concerning the occult symbols Crowley had used in his note. He told the papers that he had even seen Crowley's ghost. The papers naturally ran with the story and announced Crowley's suicide, as he loved the spotlight. Crowley faked his death because he was curious to see what his death would reveal. 4. His funeral received a very dramatic response. Crowley's funeral was attended by 12 people even though he was popular by the time of his death. It occurred on December 5, only 4 days after his death. It was a closed casket and nobody saw his body. After his funeral, the local council declared the event a desecration of the Holy Land and an act of abuse against the whole town. There was outrage and terror among the local people of Brighton and Hove. Because of his beliefs and practices, Christian services were organized in and around the city, so as to counteract the malevolent forces, as it was being referred to at the time. That people feared may have been released by his followers. Consequently, a prayer meeting was held at St. Peter's Church with 10 clergymen from all Christian denominations attending. 5. He lost his virginity at just 14. Crowley appears to have been fascinated with sex since a young age. Although it was no secret that he favored both men and women as intimate partners, he lost his virginity to a woman. This occurred at the age of 14, which is way too young by usual standards. But common sense never really applied to Crowley. Crowley brazenly had sex with the woman on his parents' bed. She was a maid at the Crowley family house. When his parents learned of this scandal, they were understandably enraged and dismissed the unfortunate maid. The maid reportedly spiraled into an alcoholic abyss before falling victim to Jack the Ripper's sadistic claws. 6. He was an avid mountain climber. Crowley developed an early interest in mountain climbing in his teenage years. Being who he was, Crowley's interest bordered on obsession, as we'll come to learn. His debut was his rock climbing stint in the Alps. In 1902, he teamed up with renowned mountaineer Oscar Eckenstein to attempt to conquer K2, the world's second highest mountain. While they couldn't scale through to the mountain peak, the Crowley-Eckenstein pair could climb up to around 22,000 feet, setting a record that would remain unbroken for another 40 years. In 1905, Crowley headed an expedition to the Himalayas to climb Kanchenjunga. The mountaineering expedition was nothing short of a disaster, with 4 lives lost. The expedition team consisted of Swiss climber Jules Guillermod, who put together the unit, 3 European climbers, and 3 Kashmiri porters. During the climb, Crowley fell out with the other climbers, whom he thought were inexperienced and reckless. The other climbers, in turn, didn't fancy his leadership style. They thought he was overbearing and overly cautious. The group of 5 eventually splintered. The 3 climbers and porters chose to evacuate despite Crowley's warnings that an avalanche was possible. During the descent, the climbers did trigger an avalanche that claimed the lives of all 3 porters and 1 European. Amid all the avalanche mayhem, the climber and porter trio shouted for help, maybe hoping that Crowley would come to their rescue. Help never came. When questioned, Crowley maintained that he was ignorant that their calls were for help rather than shouts of conversation and merriment, which was why he didn't leave his tent until the morning to investigate. Even though Crowley didn't do anything wrong per se, the climbing community was upset by his callous dismissal of the incident. As he was the expedition's leader, some considered him responsible. Crowley didn't stop climbing and continued climbing well into adulthood. He retried the Kanchenjunga climb and made it to the summit. Crowley also made attempts at the Alps and the Pyrenees but did not reach any summits. He also made several attempts on the Eiger but was unsuccessful in all of them. Despite his apparent lack of success, Crowley remained passionate about mountain climbing and wrote several books on the subject. 7. He studied at Cambridge. Yes. Aleister Crowley studied at Cambridge University. He attended Trinity College from 1895 to 1898, where he studied mathematics, natural sciences, and engineering. He did not complete his degree. He spent the majority of Crowley's time at university enjoying his hobbies. He served as chess club president and played the game for 2 hours daily. He tried going professional, but it didn't work out. Crowley also devoted time to literature and poetry. He was particularly passionate about the works of Richard Francis Burton and Percy Bysshe Shelley. His poems frequently appeared in student magazines like the Granta, Cambridge Magazine, and Cantab. 8. He was part of many occult groups. Aleister Crowley was an influential figure in the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, an order of magicians and occultists who practiced ceremonial magic and sought to gain knowledge of the spiritual world. He joined the group in 1898 and was responsible for revising and expanding the group's rituals and teachings. He developed a system of magical practices incorporating elements of mysticism, astrology, and the Kabbalah. Other Crowley's comrades in the London Golden Dawn group at the time included poet William Butler Yeats, author Bram Stoker, and creator of Sherlock Holmes, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Their mutual interest in alchemy attracted Crowley to the group. Though some biographers hypothesized that Crowley may have initially joined the group on the orders of the British Secret Services, Crowley was also a member of the A Therefore and Ordo Templi Orientis, OTO. His works have influenced many groups, including the Church of Satan, the Temple of Set, and the Typhonian Order. 9. He founded a religion after an Egyptian god spoke to him. While in Cairo with his wife in 1904, Crowley claimed to hear the voice of an entity he referred to as Iwas, which he believed was an Egyptian messenger god Horus. He wrote down this voice's teachings, which he published in 1904 as the Book of the Law. This book formed the basis of his Thelema religion and its principal tenets, including the "do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law." This phrase encapsulates the idea that each person should strive to live according to their desires and interests while acting out of love and respect for others. Crowley believed that the Aeon of Horus was the dawning of a new age and that his 10. He practiced sex magic, and regarded consuming bodily fluids as a sacred act. Aleister Crowley practiced sex magic, a ritual involving physical, mental, and spiritual practices believed to enhance and empower one's sexual experience magically. Sex magic was a significant component of Thelemic rites and was meant to be transformational and illuminating. But for Crowley and his adepts, even bodily secretions played a role in spiritual transformation and enlightenment. For instance, participants in the Mass of the Phoenix had to eat a cake of light. Cakes of light were Crowley's variation of Catholic wafers made from male semen or menstrual blood. Crowley believed that sex was a powerful tool for spiritual sublimation and that it could be used to access higher realms of consciousness. He developed several rituals to this end, including the Star Ruby and the Ceremony of the 9 Angles, which both involve sexual energy and visualization. Crowley also wrote extensively about the power of sex in his works, such as the Book of Lies and Magic in Theory and Practice. Crowley's conviction in the efficacy of his magic served as a compass for his interpersonal interactions. Throughout his life, he had a lot of passionate, intense relationships with both men and women, a classic case of "prove it by the life you live."